stood downriver aboard his merchantman, bound for the island of St. Eustatia, the Polly sailing just ahead. Thus inspired, the speakers at Old South had made their plans days before they took turns at the pulpit on this dreary afternoon. Word of Philadelphia's planned tea party also reached the home of Massachusetts Governor Thomas Hutchinson, whose two sons were among the agents awaiting tea shipments. Tension mounted daily, as one by one the merchantmen, loaded down with hundreds of chests full of tea, made their way up the King's roadstead to Boston Harbor. The first ship, the Dartmouth, dropped anchor on November 17th, followed by the Eleanor and the Beaver. By law, no cargo could be unloaded for 30 days. If the Sons of Liberty were to act, they had until tonight to do so, hence this meeting inside Old South Church. Throughout the late afternoon, speakers urged Bostonians to stand united in opposition to Crown policy. Their oratory was a delaying action. Earlier, the Sons of Liberty sent the Dartmouth's owner, Francis Roch, to see Governor Hutchinson with a request to let the ship depart unloaded and thus defuse the situation. Everyone in the church awaited Roch's arrival and word of Hutchinson's decision. Shortly after 6 o'clock, Roch entered the church, jostling his way through the throng until he reached the altar railing, where he told Sam Adams of Hutchinson's verdict. The Dartmouth would remain in port to be unloaded in the morning. As everyone hushed, Adams again ascended the pulpit. Gazing over the crowd in a clear, ringing voice, he said, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." The sentence, simply read, smacks of hyperbole, but it was not overblown oratory. It was a prearranged signal. Once he uttered the words, the shrill cry of a boatswain's whistle blew outside, calling the Indians at Griffin's Wharf to action. The rain was tapering off as they manned 3 longboats, each assigned a commander and a boatswain. Following orders from Adams and Revere, the men rowed to their designated ship, scrambled over the sides, and went to work with surety and speed. Carrying lanterns, several went below to the ship's hold. With block and tackle, they brought the tea chests on deck, where their comrades attacked them with hatchets. Then the tea was poured overboard, followed by the empty chests. One of the hoists snapped violently, and a chest struck one of the men, a carpenter, upside his head. His companions, believing him dead, rowed him to shore. At first, the tea leaves lapped against the hulls, but the tide was so low that, as the tea piled higher and higher, it began to spill over the gunwales. Sweeping it back as best they could, the Indians kept at their task until each chest was destroyed. Soon, more than 90,000 pounds of tea floated in Boston Harbor. By this time, most of the Old South crew had made their way down Mill Street to the docks, joyfully watching their fellow New Englanders at work. Not all of the witnesses were amused. From a nearby house, Admiral James Montague watched helplessly, later reporting to the British Admiralty that any intervention by his men to stop this destruction would have endangered the lives of innocent people. 2 hours after the fake Indians boarded the ships, those brave and resolute men, as the Boston Gazette called them, finished their work. Years later, Joshua Wyeth, whose descendants include 3 generations of distinguished American painters, would chuckle about making so large a cup of tea for the fishes. As the tide rose, it carried the tea from one end of the harbor to the other. The following morning, Montague asked onlookers rhetorically, "Who is to pay the fiddler now?" and later informed the Admiralty that the devil is in this people. In the ensuing months, other cities followed the example of Boston and Philadelphia, holding tea parties from New York to Charleston. In Annapolis, a mob forced agents to use the tea chests as kindling to burn the Peggy Stewart. In Charleston, demonstrators led by Christopher Gadsden, a former Royal Navy officer, escorted the agents aboard ship, handed them hatchets, and oversaw the pouring of tea leaves as an oblation to Neptune. Leave it to Southerners to have owners destroy their own property, an 18th-century reversal of the time-honored tourist trap warning, "You bought it, you break it," and burn it for good measure. The participants in the tea parties were an odd mix of backgrounds and vocations. They were doctors, lawyers,